Welcome, my friends and enemies. Glad you are here. We are a little bit short today because Matt had some coming down with the sickness, as they say, and he's getting to feel better. So, wish him the bestness ever. And this is obviously not on the day of release. This is many days beforehand. So, I am still joined with the unfortunate one of the Council of the Light that always has the ability to show up. So, how you doing,
Indeed.
Sage?
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
You're
Well,
regretting every choice in life.
I am, yes, yes.
So, yeah, we have
Always
the
life without a few regrets, right?
all the regrets.
All of them might be a bit much.
I'm regretting the fact that my face is gonna get whited out so much due to my screen just blaring on my face when we get to the next part of this, or the second part of the whole thing. So, folks, what we're doing is we are talking about Lord of the Rings, because why wouldn't we? Tolkien and all that jazz.
Mhm.
So we have 2 parts that kind of interconnect, since this all is a big conspiracy. And Sage has no idea what I'm talking about for the most part.
No, I don't.
So we'll get there. Don't worry. He can follow along. Let's just hope I remember by the time this is over with. But this should probably be a roughly shorter version of it since Matt's not here to debate me. So unless Sage really feels in the debate mood, but I don't think him and I debate too terribly often now that I think about it.
Probably not.
I think for the most part we
I mean, we
agree
have
on stuff.
different topics to debate on, but those are not usually
Well, I mean, like in reference to like
covered.
what we normally talk about here, I don't think we cover too
Mhm.
much overlap in that regard. Although I do enjoy discussing stuff with you because it's always fun to see what's out there and go beyond the regular stuff. But
Indeed.
let's just jump into this since, can't get any worse than this. So, context. Currently, there was a discussion on a channel on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it, x.com. It sounds so bad. I don't know why they stuck with that, but whatever. And so basically what happened is that a user on Twitter called High King Feanor was debating somebody else that I could not for the life of me remember their name, because they were the ones hosting, not High King Feanor. And essentially there was a topic about like Rings of Power, and is it good? Is it bad? Is it canon? Is it, all the things? And they were kind of having, just the two of them were having like a debate thing. But apparently, I didn't realize this, but X/Twitter, I'm just gonna call it freaking Twitter because I'm tired of calling it X. Twitter basically has this thing where you can like do an audio conversation. You can join people into it, and then people can listen to what you're talking about. They can also like click a button to raise their hands, so then people can like allow them into the conversation. They can chat with people. It's actually kind of a cool little tidbit of technology, but I'm not particularly familiar with it. So I did it for the first time. I did run into a familiar face, Mr. Crimson Law, from YouTube, and he's been on here for one of our anime topic based stuff. You can go, sister. You don't have to be here for this. Thank you. Um, but essentially, I met him there, and we were talking in a Discord while it was going on a little bit, and um, most of the conversation was afterwards. But I was like, "Hey, fancy seeing you." Anyway, and I'm almost going wide. So we were they were having the discussion between them, and High King Feanor was saying like, "No, this isn't accurate," blah 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 blah. But it wasn't his strongest argument. It wasn't his strongest defense. He kind of backed down from a lot of things. And the other guy seemed to think that you can equate knowledge of Tolkien with accuracy of Tolkien, and that is not something I hold to. I don't know, Sage, if that's a thing you hold to.
I mean, knowledge and accuracy are separate, so in that case, I probably agree, but I'm not sure what you mean exactly.
Like, just because something happened in Tolkien, but it can be twisted to be one of 15 different views of like how that actually happened, that doesn't mean that each different varying view of how it happened is accurate to the canon.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Yeah. So knowing like Tom Bombadil, Goldberry, the Old Forest, the basic general lore about that does not mean that what I think
We
Tom
definitely
Bombadil
know
is.
that not Baron and Luthien.
Yes. We also know it's not Eru Iluvatar. Um, we also know that Tom's been there since the beginning of Arda.
Hmm.
And we also know that the professor left it there where he's like, I don't know who he is, and I'm completely fine with leaving it that way, which is
We
fine.
know that he was in Rune for a bit.
Yeah, he's that one time in the bad dream. Um, but in that regard, um, knowledge and accuracy are different things. Because if we say like Baron and Luthien are characters, yes, Baron was a dark elf from the mountains of Khazad-dûm. No, are all of those things canon? Yes. Are they all the same canon? No. They're three different sections of knowledge slammed into one thing. So uh I
I
disagree
don't
with.
think Baron as a dark elf from Khazad-dûm is in any canon.
No. Baron canon, Dark Elf canon, Khazad-dûm canon. They're
Oh, you mean the
individually
specific
they're
combination? Yeah,
individually lore knowledge canon. Like they're things that do exist in Tolkien's
yeah.
Legendarium.
I
But
wouldn't call it.
they're not amalgamated to the same thing.
Yeah, sure,
That's what
sure.
I'm saying.
A bit of a weird thing to say, but
Well, it
yeah.
was a weird debate because some of the arguments didn't make any sense. But hopefully that was not as confusing as Sage was, but Sage is European, so I expect nothing less. Uh,
Hmm.
but so
I also
base
didn't see this debate, so
well, you
I
can't
have
see it. It's
no
only
knowledge.
it
Well,
was only audio.
hearing,
I
whatever.
posted a link. You can always go back and listen to it, I suppose. But I don't know if that
Is
lets
it
you.
recorded?
I think it records it. I don't know. You'd have to go
Huh.
back and look at it.
I'll
But
go check at some point.
I dropped some comments in there because when they were talking, I was just like, "That's not how that works. That's not how that works. That doesn't work that way. This is how it actually works because this is how the professor told us what it is." And when I say the professor, I mean Tolkien, not the Tolkien professor, because the Tolkien professor will always be referred to as the Tolkien professor, because obviously the professor is the professor. The Tolkien professor is not the professor. Um,
It gets confusing.
it doesn't really. Calling Tolkien the Tolkien professor would be very weird. So that's how you
No,
tell the
he is.
difference.
So it's the difference is the Tolkien professor or
The Tolkien
Tolkien the
professor is a
professor.
title. The professor is a title for Tolkien. And the Tolkien professor is not Tolkien.
Hmm.
So, needless to say, they had lots of things come up in the conversation. I couldn't possibly tell you. It was like a freaking 4-hour recording, so I couldn't tell you all of the details and everything. Little, um, I could probably see if I could find the link. If I can, I'll try to put it into the description box down below, and you guys can go listen to it yourselves. If I can't, it's not that big of a loss, honestly. But essentially, other people came in, and other people started going off about how we need to have diversity and inclusion, and we have to have safe spaces because hatred and bigotry is not allowed, but except that they hate hatred and bigotry and thus are participating in hatred and bigotry by definition. It was a very weird thing to say, but it's all the talking points of an NPC you'd expect. Um, and I can actually technically I'll just read because Crimson asked me my thoughts, so I will just read my thoughts um, because, well, it's easier to account for everything that way. I have to go all the way up. There we go. Exact location. All right. I think. Goodness gracious, this is a lot longer up than I thought. Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Well,
I found it. Ah, stop
okay, cool.
scrolling on me, Discord. What are you doing?
So you lost it again?
Well, Discord does like the loading thing, so it like shoves everything down every single time you do it.
Yeah.
Bother. Okay. Goodness gracious. Um, as some of the people were coming in and commenting their useless drivel, um, we were finding out a whole bunch of different uh, bits and pieces. But I was asked here. I found it this time. I was asked, "What did I think of the debate?" And I was like, "The racism, homophobia, etc. card was played so much, and it is irrelevant. If a show is bad quality, things will show that, such as printed armor instead of actual armor, bendable weapons, explosions of things that can't explode, etc. The actors may be working with what they are given, however, that doesn't mean they are good actors. So just because we give an actor the benefit of the doubt that they're acting like, oh, they're good actors, like I could say, I'm not going to make that claim, but I say maybe their bad acting isn't their fault. Maybe it's the way they were directed to act.
Yeah, so they could be good, but we simply don't know.
We don't know. So I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the Rings of Power actors and say it's just that's what they were given, but I'm not going to come out and say they're good actors because I don't know. I don't know any of them from anything, and I don't really want to after watching Rings of Power. But needless to say, it's like that may or may not be on them. I don't know. I don't think Morford Clark's that good of an actress. I saw I think a clip of her in something else, and I was just like, she's just the same everywhere. And the fact that she does not open her mouth to talk, she just talks like this the entire time, is really annoying. But I was like, Galadriel and Sauron's story are nowhere near Tolkien's story because they were talking about in the debate. Oh, look, they were just working with what they had. They had to adapt it, and with making an adaptation, this is what you can and can't do. Blah 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 blah, like that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, well, no. When you're adapting something, you're not just changing stuff for the sake of changing stuff. What you're doing is you're changing what you can't translate. You're not changing an entire plot line. You're not adding a whole new storyline. You're not doing all this excessive, unneeded, unnecessary things.
Exactly.
You're just saying, okay, for example, Rings of Power adaptation. Sauron kills Finrod, apparently, and Galadriel has a hate boner and goes after him and hunts him all over the place, slaughtering orcs all she comes by them, kills an ice troll in under 10 seconds because she's Galadriel.
Mm-hmm.
And then, turns around, goes down. She's like, I'm being very troublesome. Gil-galad's like, I think it's called, was it Gil-gadaddy? Yeah, Gil-gadaddy is they call him. Gil-gadaddy and Galadriel. Gil-gadaddy comes out and is like, you're being very troublesome. I'm sending you back to Valinor. So they put her on a ship with her crew of like 10 people.
But are you going to explain the entire plot of the sea?
No. I'm just doing the intro. Just the intro.
Okay, fair enough.
So she gets on the ship, which, as far as I'm aware, they can't do at this time because it's too early in the time period for them to be able to come back. Like at some point, they're given the permission to be able to come back. It's not at this point.
No, it's allowed at this point.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, after the War of Wrath, so when Balerion sinks, they all are allowed to go back.
Okay, because they don't, at least for the most part.
Some of them don't, but a lot of them do go back.
I don't blame them.
Galadriel isn't one of the ones that goes back.
Yeah, but she wanted to rule the country and stuff, so
exactly.
I let her do that thing. So she gets put on this boat, goes to Valinor, and apparently there's a portal that opens up for Valinor because we can't just have an ocean and then a beach or a dock or a port or something. So this portal opens up out of nowhere. Oh, it's basically heaven, right? Because that's totally accurate. And so she just decides, I don't want to go there, and just jumps in the water and decides to swim probably thousands of miles to get back to Middle Earth. And in the process runs into a randomly traveling Sauron, and then they have the hots for each other randomly. Then they get roped up into Numenor, and there's a sea monster and all that jazz. Like it's like all that stuff. None of that happened. None of it. So you can't be like, well, they had to adapt what they could. That's not how adaptation's supposed to work. That's how
specifically also a quote from Tolkien himself, right? The canons of narrative cannot be wholly different in any medium. Failure of films often precisely an exaggeration and the intrusion of unwanted matter owing to not perceiving where the core of the original lies.
Yeah. So basically, you'd have to, at bare minimum, for an adaptation, and this Wheel of Time has the same problem on Amazon. Not the books. The books are fine.
So depictions can change because some things don't translate well to visual
Yeah. Well,
things.
you can
But
cut
the
you can cut
narrative
stuff.
story cannot be different.
The skeleton of the plot cannot, I repeat, cannot be changed. You can't change the part that Frodo gets the ring. Frodo and Sam travel, uh, and then pick up Merry Pippin, then pick up Aragorn. They're attacked by ring wraiths. Like you can't change that stuff. That's integral to the part. Now you can change the fact that how many drinks do they have at the Prancing Pony. You can change how much time passes while they're at the Prancing Pony. Like you can condense it for the movie medium or something like that. But you can't just like remove it and be like, Frodo has the ring into the Shire and now he's in Mordor walking up to Mount Doom. Like you left the whole skeleton. You have the feet and you have the head, but you took the rest of it right out. You can't do
Mhm.
that. So
Yeah, you
adaptation,
basically have half the story left at that point.
you don't even have half the story. You have less than half the story at that point. Um,
Fair
it,
enough.
you have to keep to the main core, and I'm not going to go to the Wheel of Time stuff because that's a lot longer of a series to cover. But essentially, for this part, they could have had it where the end of War of Wrath. I don't know how much they're allowed to have because they don't have rights to the first age, and what they have rights in the first and the second age
I'm pretty sure the
is
War of Wrath is not allowed in their
yes, but I'm saying they could be like the brunt, like they could have like an exposition of some sort, where they're saying now that Morgoth has been defeated, that kind of a thing.
It
Like I don't
may
know.
also be the case that they are not allowed to say that the elves are allowed back into Valinor after the War of Wrath, maybe.
Well, I'm saying I don't know what they're allowed to
Yeah, I
because I
also
don't.
don't know.
I don't know the extent of the appendices. I heard that they
I
purchased
don't think
extra. I heard that
in
they
the
purchased extra
appendices it says
rights.
anything about the return to Valinor.
Well, yes, but if there's nothing there, then I don't. I'm assuming they could just make it up.
Good point.
They
Yeah,
could say
which
there's a
they did.
proclamation. The
They did.
Valinor sent us a proclamation, and we can come back. That's gonna be all it is. I don't know, but what I do know is that there is a rumor, which is definitely there. I do know that there's a rumor um, that allegedly they bought additional rights to stuff in the Silmarillion, in which they could finagle it
Yeah,
around.
good point.
If they did do that, they have more to work with. If they
Did
didn't
they
do
do that
that,
before season one, or
I believe it was season 2 for that
okay,
part. I didn't
and
hear
didn't
anything about
use
that in the first.
anything?
But that's the thing is like I don't know. Um, I don't know why you would buy rights to the appendices, which is what they bought, and I'm like, there's not that much there. So what are you planning on building a freaking whole even one season
I
of
mean, the
Rings of Power?
timeline is in there,
The timeline is in there, but it's like
and
a
that you can.
sentence covers
It's
hundreds of years.
true,
Like
true.
it's not like here's the broken
It is
down
enough
narration
if all they
system.
want is the name and a
And they,
basic
they wanted
outline
they
for the
wanted
story.
to construct their own thing. I get that. Now, here's the thing. For an adaptation, you have to still stick with what it says. If you're going to time jump, you have
Let's rephrase that. It's for an accurate adaptation, a good one.
well, I'm saying the basic definition of adaptation is to adapt something from one to the other. If you make it wholly different, as Tolkien mentions,
Hmm.
it is wholly not the same thing. It is not an
Yes.
adaptation, it is a recreation. That's a different thing. So, um, in that regard, it's not the same thing. So, for an adaptation to be an adaptation, much like to be a fan, you can't be just somebody who walks in, tests out the water, and then walks out saying, "I like that." That doesn't make you a fan. That makes you a tourist. A fan is somebody who cares about that material that actually is born from it. Now you can say, "Well, I'm a movie fan." I'm like, "You're a fan of a copy? Not even the real thing? You don't even like the thing?" But whatever. Either way, an adaptation, in order for it to be an adaptation of something. So if say it's an adaptation of Lord of the Rings, well, you have several plot beats you have to hit for it to even be considered a Lord of the Rings thing.
If not, then it's merely inspired by.
Well, it's not even based on, inspired by. It's not even that. It's like we took the names, we took the places, we took characters, and then we shuffled everything around, and then that's what it is. Welcome to Wheel of Time. So, adaptation by definition has to hold to some semblance of like something that I can see and say that makes sense. Now, if you're pulling from the work of the appendices and or from the second age or something, it has to have those aspects involved. If it doesn't have those aspects, then what's the point? You're not doing an adaptation. If you take certain characters and then put them in certain instances in which they do not behave or are ever in those situations to begin with, then it's not an adaptation. You're literally creating, you're making stuff up. And they've already told us they've made stuff up to fill in spots. But they also made stuff up to give people who don't exist screen time. And Wheel of Time had the same problem. They kept giving screen time to things that didn't exist, but said, we don't have time to do a proper adaptation. Then waste 90% of every episode on stuff that didn't happen. It's the same problem. Adaptation is not that difficult. I'm not a script writer, but I could write a script for both Rings of Power and for Wheel of Time. Now, the Jolly Viking, a YouTube channel, he did a rescript of it. It's not perfect, but he tried to fix what they did while staying kind of within the bounds that they created. So it's not perfect, but it made a lot of things more sense. So instead of the stranger being in Rune, it was Glorfindel. It's like characters that would make sense in the places they're at because of whatever adventures they're on. It's possible. It is hypothetically possible Glorfindel went to Rune. It's possible he went to
Well, why
Horaz.
though?
Well, that doesn't matter. The point is that it's possible where
Sure.
it wouldn't make sense for Gandalf, since Gandalf is not the blue, and also Gandalf was not there that time period. That too. So there are things that don't make sense in that regard. Now, I kind of went on and continued about the whole, they're not near a Tolkien story, and that's not debatable. There is no debate about, oh, they met on a raft after a sea monster attacks the ship, and she just started swimming for whatever reason, hundreds and possibly thousands of miles away from any land, mind you, any land. That's not a thing. It's nowhere in Tolkien's Legendarium. You'll never find it in Tolkien's Legendarium. They made it up purely on their own. I said they have
It's
zero
also
legs.
extremely silly.
It is ridiculous. Like, but they're an elf. Elves can run out of energy at some point. They still have to eat. You can't eat much in the middle of the ocean. They don't have. She doesn't have lembas bread. They don't have meat, which they did eat in the Hobbit. And it's like the lore
Yes,
changing.
you could eat a random sea serpent that passes by.
Sorry, Olmo. The lore changing doesn't invalidate what Christopher Tolkien gave us, as Tolkien made him the successor. Safe spaces are anti-free spaces, free speech spaces by default. They do not allow discourse of ideas. There can be no good discussions if one side can leverage safe spaces against the bigot side and shun all outward opinions, leaving just an echo chamber. They may have a point here and there, and they may not. But just being knowledgeable of Tolkien does not make you correct. That was my response to the overall debate. That was a really long debate. Lots of people have their different opinions. Some people try to come in there and try to shut down High King Fëanor, saying he's talked plenty, let us talk because we're minorities or whatever stupid crap like that. Like, never once did Fëanor refer to anyone as like being a minority or not a minority. It was not part. It's not relevant to the overall story and everything. But that whole debate was just kind of aimed in that way. But the one guy who was hosting seemed like him and a couple of his co-hosts. It was like a 3v1 against High King Fëanor. Not Fëanor. And I didn't think that was particularly fair. Like, Fëanor should have been able to bring some other people on to help him. So if he stumbled to something, they could pick up the pace and say, actually, what he means is this, and then build together a more complete system. But the host was arguing, and I mean, to be fair to them, when somebody who came in about safe spaces or bigots and all that stuff, they did shut them down, saying that's not good for the conversation or the discourse. It's not productive or anything. So I give them mad props for that. But I didn't agree with them when they said like, well, what they did with the adaptation was lore because they had this in there, they had this in there, and it's just like, yes, but I don't want individual thises. I want the individual thises in the proper order. Like, I want the 3 elven rings to be made outside of Sauron's awareness, not included into them. I want the other rings to be made beforehand. Sauron gets his hands on those, finds out about the 3, comes back and sees his Eregion because he wants those 3 rings. And ultimately he fails in that venture, but that's how the story goes. They literally did it completely backwards. So that doesn't make any sense. Now, one of the things brought up in the debate was canon. And if any of you know how I feel about canon, I don't consider things canon just because whoever has the rights at the moment writes something down and that's canon. That's not how canon works. You can't just dismiss canon. Now, to be
But
fair,
you can, but it would be a meaningless dismissal.
well, you personally can, but that makes it just head canon, and that doesn't mean it's canon. You can't change canon. You
Mhm.
can change your opinion or view of it, but you can't change the fact that it's canon. Now, I will say things like Star Wars Legends and the entire EU, not your EU, the actual Star Wars EU. Don't want to get the confused stuff. One's really good, one's not so good. But in the Star Wars EU isn't technically canon, although from what I understand, and I could be wrong. Don't hold me to this. I'm not a Star Wars theory or a Mahler or a Ryan Cannell or even a Matt where I have infinite excess knowledge of it. But from what I understand, George Lucas was okay with it. I mean, they had books. I'm sure he got plenty of profits off of those books, comics, games, tons of stuff that were legends and still counted. Disney came in, scrapped it because they wanted to make their own thing rather than just using what was there, which would have been the very smart thing to do. If they had gone in and faithfully reproduced some of the works in the EU, oh my gosh, they'd be swimming in the cash. They just decided not to do that. So
And as
there's
a result, the whole
there's
thing died.
Star Wars just never made profit. That's the best part. Like how much, and I'm not saying that the movies themselves didn't quote unquote make profit. Like Force Awakens could have made profit, but Star Wars, the entire thing has not made profit because they paid what 40 billion or something for it to get the name of it. They have not made 40 billion back from this. In fact, most of the stuff they've made has lost money. They have not made profit since Disney has bought Star Wars. So all that kind of just goes out the window. You can say, "Oh, well, Force Awakens made money, or any of the other movies made money." Most of them did not, but the ones that did not make up for the billions they've spent. Put it that way. So they're in the red, not in the black. So in canon, things like either She-Hulk or Batman or whatever, like Captain America, anytime they have a character act outside of what they would normally behave, because what they would normally behave because the creator comes out and says, here's what this person does. Like Steve Rogers does the right thing. He's a good Christian boy. He wants to fight for his country, yada yada yada. He's willing to sacrifice himself to get it, and that's why he gets chosen for the serum and all that jazz. But he leads his troops against the Nazis, blah blah blah. He gets frozen, comes out, and it's a whole different world, all that jazz. But we know how he behaves because we see him behave and we see how he interacts with things. But then you can't just come out later on and say he became a Nazi or he's a this or he's a that. Now I know that there's a storyline where he gets like brainwashed to some extent or whatever, but there's, I think, also other people have said he's like a full-blown actual Nazi. I'm like, you are off your rocker. That's clearly not the case. But they try to do that because he's truth, justice, the American way mentality, not the exact same as Superman, but the mentality of where like America before Nazis kind of a thing, and that makes him some alt-right fascist whatever thing. Like that makes him a Nazi for whatever reason, because that's how that works. But that's not how the story works for Steve Rogers. No matter how you shake a stick at it, that's just not how it works. You cannot change it. Even if you have the rights and you completely turn him into the worst villain on the planet, he'll never be the actual true worst villain of the planet because that's not how his character works. It's just not the case. Just because you have the rights in the modern times does not mean all the old stuff just disappears. Maybe you do an alternate reality timeline starting issue 1 and then work your way up. That version maybe can do that, but you can't take the original and do that. That's not how that works. But that's the problem with multiverses, and I hate multiverses, so that's a different story. Point being, canon cannot change from its original source material. Wheel of Time original source material cannot change to match Wheel of Time Prime. It doesn't work that way. So when somebody says, "Oh, well, there's not really canon." Well, we do have an instance where someone says, "We don't have canon." So
Wait a minute. Could this be the video that you were talking about?
this could be the video I was talking about. So
Hmm.
for those of you who would love to see this, hey, video. And I'm really, really hoping that it actually records because I have not actually tested this. So we're gonna hope it works. All right.
If not, we'll find out later.
Yeah, and I feel really bad and really stupid. But I am not a producer nor am I an editor, so I'm just an idiot. All right. So this little clip here, it's kind of infamous at this point, but if you haven't seen it, you're about to.
First thing to specify is that there's no such thing really as canon in Tolkien. Tolkien's ideas were ever evolving.
Now, before we go any further,
Yeah, wow.
yes
That's
and
already
no.
yikes.
Yes and no. His ideas were ever evolving because that's how
Yes,
the creative process works.
that's how everything works.
When you have a rough draft, then you have your first draft, your second draft, third draft, fourth draft, fifth draft, blah 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 blah, and you're getting a lay of the land as you're writing this ginormous world with languages you've created from scratch, with characters from all over the place, different people groups, societies, different ideas, everything, and you're trying to cram them all to make sense. And I've done this. I started writing a novel, kind of scrapped it, started writing it again, kind of scrapped it, and kind of working on it again, something else differently entirely. When you do these kind of things, it does not mean they did not happen. It just means that they're not the main canon for all of them. There is still a main canon, and the only person who could tell you that main canon is the author. But it doesn't mean the work
Indeed.
should go
Yes.
bye just because. So
Mhm.
if you have the Unfinished Tales or Book of Lost Tales 1 and 2 or any of these other ones in the background, just because they have conflicting parts doesn't mean it's not interesting stuff to read. Like
Mhm.
here's a look at what Tolkien thought it would look like in this instance, in this behavior. And then over here is where he thought in this type of thing. The most probably famous one of them all is, the origin of the orcs. How did orcs come
Mhm.
into being for one? How did orcs reproduce? What were they like? Were they pure evil? Were they, tortured into being evil? What did they have a abusive family and then that's why they became evil, the villains their entire lives, whatever. But
Definitely the last one.
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel abused just watching Rings of Power, but uh
True.
now to start my villain arc.
Mhm.
But Tolkien lands on one. We get him in the Silmarillion. We get, your basic gist
Well,
of stuff.
we don't really know if the Silmarillion is the one Tolkien landed on. We know it's the one Christopher chose.
Well, we
as the
know
one
that's the one he landed on because he gave Christopher permission to do so. And it also lines up perfectly with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings,
It does line up, yeah.
which would make perfect sense. So orcs are altogether evil.
But not irredeemably so.
As far as we are aware, they have only one purpose, and that's to do evil. They don't have.
Yeah, but
They're,
then
they're not
not
Skyrim
irredeemably.
orcs where they can be civilized and like they're not Rings of Power orcs. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
They can't be like, but my family, I don't
Yeah,
want to go to
yeah.
war. They can't do that. They might run away because they don't want to get killed,
Mhm.
but they are evil. If they catch a merchant out in the wares, they're gonna murder the dude, probably eat him, and take all of his stuff. They're not gonna be like, man, I regret doing that. I should go to like an orc meeting or something, and then explain to all the other orcs how bad I feel for eating that merchant, and possibly raping his daughter and his wife and chewing on the bones of his infant son. Like they're not going to do that. They're evil. They're literally evil. And as far as I'm aware, there are no redeemable qualities of them. There's no counterpoint, but
Well,
might be disputed. But
not in the current version.
okay, that's what we're talking about. That's the canon.
But yeah, okay, sure.
We're talking about the canon, not the others. Now, I'm not saying that the other ones didn't have possibilities like that. That's a different story. But I'm saying in the what we would consider the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion line.
Mhm. Yeah, but there's nothing mentioned specifically about whether they are truly irredeemably evil. We only know that they're not because of Tolkien's letters.
Are they not evil or they're not good?
They are evil, but not irredeemably so.
Are you saying because the word irredeemable was not used, therefore? Is that what your argument
No,
is?
it's because it's not the evil nature of the orcs isn't mentioned specifically as their inherent nature. It's just that we see the actions. The actions are evil.
If you
but
left
they're
a
not
group of orcs
evil.
out and about on their own without any influence from anybody else, they would still kill,
We don't know.
pillage. Well,
We
they
never
would.
seen that.
They
They
would.
likely would.
It's similar to Trollocs, dude. Like there has been nothing to show the opposite. Let's put it that way.
Except Tolkien's letters.
But Tolkien's letters on which version?
On all of them. He never said anything beyond that.
Did he say they were evil?
Yeah,
Did he say they were not evil?
but that's not the same as
Well, it's a pretty broad point of evil versus not evil. If they weren't evil, they could be doing evil deeds, but they were themselves.
right. So would you say Aragorn is good?
Yes.
Does that mean he cannot ever possibly do anything that is not good?
Are we talking about blood or actual possibility?
Sorry, what do you mean the first one?
Well, by blood, like as him being a Numenorian royalty, having a lot of expectations of him, etc.
No, just logical consistency.
You're saying philosophically, could he choose to do evil?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So we
But
don't say
no,
he is.
but we would not say he is evil. He was never portrayed as evil.
Sure.
He's never shown to have evil thoughts.
But he's not
always portrayed as good.
Inherently, always, on every single instance.
I mean, technically he is. From the written works, he is.
Right. Okay. I see. We will not get out of this conversation.
Either way, I understand what you're saying, but I think you're taking more or less what the generality of it, because he's not going to go into every detail. Like, well, and then Grishnak over here, he's inherently evil, but Schnarzbuckle, he's not inherently evil. He's not going to go through every single one. He's generalizing the audience of what his target is. So when he says they are evil and they worshipped Morgoth, they served Morgoth, they whatever Morgoth, did the same thing for Sauron.
Well, they were also dominated, but that's...
Well, they were dominated, but they didn't have to be in order to be evil.
True.
For example, technically the goblins in was it the Misty Mountains? They're not being actively dominated by anybody.
Yeah, at the moment, sure.
And they still do evil things.
True.
And there's no sign, no written of anything in his work showing they do anything good.
True.
So
that doesn't mean they can't.
I'm not saying they can or can't. I'm saying what they are and what they aren't.
No, but that's what irredeemable means.
I know, but you're bringing up the irredeemable aspect.
Yeah, because
I'm saying bringing up something that's not redeemable, like redeemable, irredeemable is not a thing in the context of the conversation. We're talking about, are they evil or are they good? There is no orc ever shown to have the potentiality to do good. Therefore, it's presumed, based off of the stance he took and how he developed the orcs, that they do not have the capacity to do good.
Right.
Much like Sauron does not have the capacity to do good because he has... No, it's saying it's... Well, what he would have wanted and what actually ended up being the case because he didn't have enough time. Same thing for Robert Jordan. If Tolkien didn't write a note...
The point is, he didn't have enough time to specifically map out the nature, but he also never explicitly mentioned that they are definitely irredeemably evil.
It's not necessary to do so.
It is.
How so?
Because you can't do specific... So if you don't, you leave out open the possibility that it's not always perfectly one way.
Why?
Because I don't go... if I don't state, this always happens.
Tolkien doesn't inherently state in the books themselves the theme of good and evil.
Yeah.
The theme of good and evil is
not necessarily the case that it is irredeemable.
I'm
That's
saying
just your
I'm
own
saying there's a
interpretation.
lot of things we could create into the concept that aren't part of it. So I'm sure that he talked to Christopher an awful lot, even when he was not able to write himself. And I'm sure he left notes. And if Christopher thought for a second that there was this hint of a semblance or something of them being redeemable, he would put that into the works. There'd be no reason for him not to,
Why would you put that into the works?
because apparently it would be necessary for people like you.
No.
Yes. If it was necessary to distinguish them from what they have already been distinguished as. If they are been
No, no.
shown to be evil.
If they are shown to be evil, sure, they are evil. But
Put it
that
this way.
doesn't mean
If you write a thing that says, and they were twisted and contorted by Morgoth, and they were corrupted beyond all whatever. They are corrupted. They are corrupt, which means they are already turned away from their original intention.
sure, but things can be purified.
Things can be, yes, not necessarily in the Tolkien world. It is not
They say
shown. It is not
it's
shown.
not shown. Okay, sure.
Okay, we're not talking about all, like literally all of human existence and history and whatnot. What we were talking about is what is within the binds of Arda or the Legendarium itself. So within the binds of the Legendarium, it's implied through the words that are spoken, or well, I guess recorded by the elves in the Silmarillion, or I guess if the audiobook spoken, the words Tolkien used to put down the entirety of the story when he says they are corrupted and do evil deeds. Unless he states something which we all know that Tolkien would be very, very, very picky about this, very pedantic, because that's what he is. He's everything
Right.
he said, every letter, every word, everything had a purpose. So for him to leave out this massive detail would be kind of a big misstep by the professor himself. Now,
Except it's not really necessary to state that explicitly.
it's not necessary if it's not
because
the
we
beam.
assume from our own experiences with reality.
It would be the simplest comma, add on a little thing on the end where it
Right.
says they were corrupted beyond redemption. That's all he'd have to write, and that would remove the irredeemable. He did not, because he didn't need to. It's supposed to be accepted that they are corrupted.
Why?
They are.
Yeah, okay, sure. They were corrupted.
They're corrupted. Okay, so if they're corrupted,
that doesn't
nowhere
mean they cannot be uncorrupted.
There's nowhere saying that they can be. That's my point.
Right. Okay.
If it doesn't show positive, it doesn't show the negative, you have to stick with what's there. And if you know that the person's pedantic enough to say, I have this opinion or this opinion on this, well, in that case, you'd be like, okay, I can trust that if the professor really wanted to put this point across to show that they can be redeemed, then they would be redeemable. That's never brought into the picture.
No,
Every
because
person,
the whole concept of redeemability is not part of the story.
exactly. You're bringing the hypothetical of a real life possibility, which is not placed into this.
I'm just saying.
Well, is it possible that somebody makes a
doesn't-
minigun and then uses that against orcs? Yes, it's possible, but it's not
the
in there because
story
it's not part of the
itself
story.
doesn't include whether or not, right, either the positive or the negative of being redeemable.
All
It's
it states
just
is
that
they are
he
corrupted.
elaborated outside of the work itself, because it's not part of the story, that they are not irredeemably evil.
There is no story in the Legendarium that tells a part of the orcs
Doesn't
not
matter.
being corrupted. That's what matters. There is nothing in the story that says they are not corrupted.
No, they are corrupted in the story.
Yes.
Because the story takes place
And
during
not once did the Valar,
corrupted
the Maya, nobody ever said, but we can fix them.
No, because that would be a silly thing to say, because that's
If it was possible to be redeemable, no, it wouldn't be a silly thing.
No one says I can fix them.
I mean, the
in a
people do that when they watch their
serious
movies.
tone.
It's paraphrasing. You understand what I'm saying? They could say, well, we could still redeem the children of Iluvatar who have been corrupted. Nobody, the wisest of all, those connected directly to Eru Iluvatar himself. Eru Iluvatar himself doesn't say anything on the matter.
Eru kind of does have a not full interaction with the world. Let's say he's sort of like observing from
Yes, but he
distance.
communicates to Manwë,
Sure.
and nothing
So
is coming from Manwë.
he doesn't say everything to Manwë.
Yes, but if it's something he wants, he does.
Right.
So we can build from the building blocks that we have and build a
I get that.
structure. We cannot build a structure off of a missing cornerstone piece called irredeemable or redeemable because it's not there. So
Yeah,
we can't use
because
that
it's
as the
not
story.
there, you can't just instead build with the other cornerstone piece that definitely they are irredeemable,
Well, why wouldn't they be?
because it's not mentioned. You can't just make them explicitly irredeemable.
Are they called evil? Are they called corrupted?
That doesn't matter.
Well, it does.
No, because it's a generality.
It is a generality that they are corrupted and evil.
Yeah,
Across the board. There's no
exactly.
exceptions.
So it doesn't matter because the nature of evil on its own does not mean it cannot turn into good.
So Sauron could have accepted his punishment and gone back
Yes,
to Valar.
he could have.
No, he couldn't have.
He could
Because
have.
his own nature. You'd like to think philosophically he would or could, but he himself decided he
He
can't.
could have, but he chose not to.
Yes, because of his nature. He
But
himself
he could have done that.
his own. I wouldn't say it's corrupted in the same sense as the orcs and elves corruption, like elves to orcs, but his own corruption under Morgoth and his teachings or his wisdom or whatever, and his own pride and everything about him would not allow him to be otherwise. He has free will, and you could argue the orcs have free will to some
Yes.
extent.
Well,
But
when
they-
they're not dominated, that is.
Well, I'm saying even if they weren't dominated,
Yeah.
but they would find delight in doing evil.
Sure.
Those who find delight in doing evil are not the kind that redeem.
Right, but not inherently so.
But we're showing inherently they became corrupted. They were made that way. So it's like
No.
Morgoth made them irredeemable.
Right.
That's part of
Okay.
the process.
We will never agree on this. We can keep talking in
I
circles.
understand what you're saying, and I'm saying in a real world scenario where we're actually talking about people that we can communicate with, I would totally agree with you. But when we have things written down and they're definitive words, they're not just tips and like little itty bitty pieces of it. It's like definitive evil and corrupted, not like corrupted against their will or this, that, or the other. Of course, it was against their will. It doesn't have to say it was against their will, but they were still corrupted.
Okay,
The corruption removes that innocent aspect. Lots of stuff the orcs, as far as we know, because of what was written in the lore, there's limitations on what they could possibly be. Do you think a Dark Lord is going to allow people who are wishy-washy in their, decision-making skills about whether or not they want to kill it? They're not going to be allowed either, one, to live, or B, to have that freedom.
Sure.
So they're going to corrupt them against their will, so they can't choose to do otherwise.
Right.
That's how you get, it's the same thing as if you have a Marvel series where they brainwash a whole bunch of people, or like the Suicide Kills the Justice League, where the big bad guy brainwashes the Justice League and they have to send the Suicide Squad in to kill off the Justice League.
Oh yeah, is that the game?
Yes, that's the game.
I don't know the story of the game other than
So the Justice League gets brainwashed by the bad guy, and the Suicide Squad are the bad guys that work for the good guys to go take out the good guys that have been brainwashed by the bad guy. So the bad guy took away the ability to be redeemable from them.
Sure.
They technically could have been, if they had killed the bad guy and it released the brainwashing, that could have happened that way. That's not how it works in the Tolkien world. It's not like it's just like, oh, we removed it. Oh, we don't have to do this anymore. No, it's not the case.
Sure.
So,
but let's get back to the.
I know, but my point is that it's a philosophical, fun debate to talk about. Like, oh, could they do this? Could they do that? But in the Tolkien world, that's not even hinted at as even a possibility. But you're saying, based off of how I feel in philosophy about now and everything in in real life, that would also apply to them in this particular scenario and situation.
I'm saying that based on Tolkien's own words.
About which version? I can understand them being in one version that they were that way, and I can see in another version of that way, but not in the version that we have now that goes all the way through the Silmarillion. Because it's never I've gone through Silmarillion, it doesn't have that anywhere that I can find. I've not found anybody else who has found it to be that way in the current canon line through Christopher Tolkien. If it isn't something else, I'm happy to admit that that's how it could have been.
Right.
But I
I'll,
feel that the reason it didn't make
I'll
it.
go look up exactly where I can find the stuff, but
Okay, well, I'll move on so we can get this
you know
over with.
that. Yeah.
Thank you kindly, Grandel.
Oh fuck.
In the text of the Lord of the Rings, we are told that Gandalf, with the other wizards,
He means Grandolph, but
Yeah, Grandalf.
arrived at around year 1000 of the Third Age. And in his later years, he was
notice that is not the same timeline as
Wait a
Power.
minute, that's not the second age, is it?
He said Third Age.
playing with
but
the
it-
idea
Third
of
Age
maybe
is not the
Gandalf
second
coming
age.
sooner, maybe some of the wizards coming in the Second Age and taking part in the wars of the Rings of Power.
When it comes to
Right, so this is an example of
Third
changing
Age.
the narrative.
Yes, this is changing. Like what he's describing is accurate to the books. What he's describing is not what is in the Rings of Power in the slightest. And so you could take a very, very far back approach and look at it in a very broad spectrum and completely ignore the timeline. You could say, I could see how this kind of fits, barely, roughly, not really, but sort of, not really. And maybe you could come up with the Rings of Power thing and like, oh yeah, they line up. That's not how that works.
Gandalf, that's the most common name that people know him by. But what are some of the other names?
Is it?
Like a personal favorite of mine is Olorin.
Mithrandir. Olorin is also
Also, it's not Olorin, it's Olorin.
Olorin.
He's known as Mithrandir among the elves and in Gondor. He's known as Gandalf in the north. He's known as Tharkun to the dwarves.
That's a good one.
That is a good one. And he's known as Inkanus in the south when he lived in Valinor among the gods.
Why did they say Gandalf is the most common? Surely it would be.
It's the most
Mithrandir.
common because from Lord of the Rings perspective, we always see him as Gandalf.
Yeah, but that's because he's in the north.
But even when he's in Gondor, they refer to him in Gondor as Mithrandir.
Yeah.
But us, the viewer, is reading him as Gandalf.
Okay, fair enough.
That's why. And I can agree with that.
Everyone say that.
Gandalf is the most common. Like if you were to say Tolkien's Legendarium, Wizard #1, Gray, what do you say? They say Gandalf. They don't say Mithrandir.
Okay,
they don't say
sure.
Olorin. The most common.
Common as in the most known.
I think he's
by
referring to common
us
that we
humans
know him
on Earth.
by.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
Not what the show. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, even though I
Yeah,
don't
that
agree with him
seems
on everything.
His name was Olorin.
True.
So it suggests
Well,
he's been
no, it's
around lots
Olorin.
of places.
Well, I meant like the spelling and all that jazz. Unfortunately, you can't get everything right when it comes to fantasy names.
Has impacted many different communities and many different peoples, and they've known him under many different names.
Also-
That
So he
same
found his
passage where he
name.
talks about his different names, he says to
But here's the problem. Everything he's saying right now is what we would call canon.
Yep.
This is the problem for the Tolkien professor because
Wait a minute, didn't
he
he
said
just
there was
say?
no canon.
Curious, indeed.
No, I'm shocked. I tell you, shocked.
the east I go not. When we look at that quote in context, he's talking to a dude from Gondor, and the people of Gondor, they call Mordor the east. He meant, don't expect me to go throw down with, the Dark Lord at the gate.
That's an assumption. Might be accurate, but it's still an assumption.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously the wizards are not going to be like, yeah, let's go take on Sauron. Wit for wit, battle to battle, fisticuffs to fisticuffs. Like that's not what they're going to do. That their job is, because here's the context. The Astari were sent to guide people, not do work for them.
Yep.
That's the context. So he says, I will not go there because don't expect me to go take on that person. It's up to you because you men have to learn to fight for your own. You have to be the success. You have to be the response to evil. Otherwise, you will fall into evil yourselves, which is what happened to, obviously, the Ringwraiths and probably their kin as well. So there's certain things, like the Black Numenorians, for one, they fell into evil because they didn't fight it. They joined it. So in the context, I don't agree with his version of the context. I get that what he's trying to say, but he's also not basing that off of anything that I know.
This part is probably correct. Right?
I don't.
Gandalf doesn't want to go fight Sauron.
I don't think it's a matter of doesn't want to. It's a matter of he's told not to.
Yeah, but he probably also doesn't want to.
Probably not. But I don't think
Because
that ever. I don't think it
yeah.
ever crosses his mind, because the thought of disobeying what the Valar said never crossed his mind.
Fair.
So it's the same thing as like if you trust in somebody and somebody's like, "Don't you not trust them?" It's like, why would I ever think that? I fully trust them. Like, you don't have to ever think like, "Did you ever doubt them?" It's like, why would I ever doubt them? Like, why would doubt ever be brought into the conversation? I trust the person. It's never even crossed my mind because I trust the person.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
in that same way, saying, I'm not going to go all the way to Barad-dûr and fight the Dark Lord because I'm terrified of the Dark Lord, or I'm blah, 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 whatever. It's like, it never even entered his mind because contextually, he has the Valar.
Well, no, I mean, technically it did enter his mind, but like when he got sent there in the first place, he was like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm the good person for this job, because
From the
he's kind
point
scary.
of him being told, when you go there, don't just do stuff for things, don't win their battles for them, don't do all this extra stuff. That's not your place. Your place is to guide them.
Fair enough.
If he had the idea before, fair enough. If he
Yeah.
had the idea afterwards, not a chance. Because he's what you would call a good little boy. He does what he's told by
No, that's
the
true.
Valar. He's not the rebellious type like Saruman or potentially the Blues. We don't know what the Blues are like because there's not a lot written on them.
Yeah, they sort of lost to the.
I would say they lost. They just kind of
passage of
went
time.
away and then never came back. But
Yeah, that's what I would call lost.
well, no, lost implies they don't know where they're going. They're kind of just
Yeah, but
wandering
we've
around
lost them.
aimlessly. No, that's it, wives. But point being, what he's doing right now is what a lot of people do when it comes to canon. They fill in the gaps with their own concepts, which we call headcanon. This could be his headcanon. That's perfectly fine if he wants it to be his headcanon. I'm not going to pick beef with him because it's his headcanon. What I will say is that because he thinks it's his headcanon does not make it canon. It does not make it the fill-in for the quote-unquote God of the gaps, if you will. It's not the fill-in that you can solve the problem by filling this in. It's a nice thought to be like, oh, I could explain this aspect. But when you pull the full context, like adding the Valar, their instructions, what the wizards are supposed to do and not supposed to do, that stuff where that kind of prevents those things. We're not shown that Gandalf, Radagast, and the other Astari that don't go evil ever contemplate possibly breaking that rule. We're only ever shown them following the rule. And the only ones we're going to really get more of an eyesight on is Radagast and Gandalf, mostly Gandalf, like 98% Gandalf, because we get very little of Radagast. We get some on Saruman, but we already know he broke that rule, and then the Blues are gone somewhere, so we can't tell what they're doing. Now, there's theories that the Blues went to like Rhûn in the East lands beyond Mordor to help stir up trouble against Sauron. That's possible. And if they are following the Valar's rule, very likely. Safe to assume. But we don't know. I'd say that's what they should have done. Is they should have filled in with the stuff that's safe to assume that they are following the Valar's ruling. They are following what they're intended to do in their actual journeys. And then when they get there, they start an uprising. We could have diverse people on the screen.
Wait a minute. Is that possible?
Yeah. You could have one of them head down south to Harad. You could have one of them head over to the east, because they're both technically east. It's just how far east they went. You could have them stirring up a whole bunch of rebellions against their kings or whatever that are currently in alliance with Sauron. They could have them overthrowing it. How cool would that be? That'd be fun to see.
No, but that doesn't destroy Numenor, right?
It doesn't have anything to do with Numenor at all.
which means that we can't do it because we must
we must sink the Numenorian canon.
Indeed.
But in that concept, it's like, okay, where there, as you have to follow a path. the path has been laid. They follow instructions from the Valar. This is what they're expected to do. As long as you stay within those boundaries, you can be a little bit creative with stuff that has no data behind it. And since Christopher's long dead, or not say long dead, more recently long dead, we're not getting any more. So now you have a little bit more freedom to be like, let's touch upon these. People may or may not care about it at that point. But I would assume that it's like, hey, if you're not bastardizing Tolkien's work and Christopher's additions, then I'd say most Tolkien fans would be okay with it. But if you're bastardizing it, of course they're going to have problems with it because you're not following the path that was set. And it makes no sense whatsoever to be like, but you're just because you're bigots. I'm like, no, it's because you're an idiot. That's why. That's it. It's that simple. Let's finish this guy's up.
It's of Barad-dûr.
So when it comes to Gandalf, what is his general purpose in Middle-earth?
Gandalf
That's an excellent
is
question.
described as coming to bring encouragement to the people of Middle-earth. He just goes around the world.
Spreading hope.
Yeah, spreading hope and helping where he can.
Okay, that seems somewhat okay.
Most of what he said, except for the stuff he made up in his head, pun intended. That was not a poet and didn't know it. Not intended. Most of what he said is from the basis and foundations of canon that he says there is no canon of.
Yeah, very strange.
He's like, there's not really any canon in Tolkien's work. I'm like, so what are you quoting?
Wait a minute.
I don't think there's anything else, but I'll go back to this part.
First thing to specify is that there's no such thing really as canon in Tolkien.
Huh.
Yeah,
Could have
that's,
fooled me, because I'm pretty sure that's literally what you were talking about. You pulled from the canon. Now, if you wanted to support this, this is where he would be like, well, here's the 5 different origins of orcs, or the 300 different ways that we had the elves come into being, or blah, blah, blah. Like, he could have pointed at all the other discrepancies. And I'm
I don't think there's 300 ways.
I said I'm being hyperbolic, and I know it. I'm
Yeah,
saying there's many different things, and he could have used those as to support his thing, but instead he picks canon and runs with it.
Yeah,
that's kind of weird for somebody who has an entire university called Signum University that he created, that you can apparently pay $4,000 to go get a graduate degree and become a Tolkien professor, so to speak.
Well, I didn't know what you become, like a bachelor of Tolkien's.
Basically, like you can have a whole thing on Elvish and different languages and all that. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff you can potentially learn. I don't know if I trust anything they teach me, but
yeah, that's a good one. The main issue here also is that he doesn't seem to understand what canon is, because the mere idea that you are constantly revising your work means that there is no canon is quite silly, to be honest.
It means there's no canon at the time, but once you establish one and you continue on with that, that's canon. That's how canon works.
Not necessarily. You could argue that the canon version is just the latest iteration of your work.
But if it was the latest iteration and it goes back and follows the source and everything, like from where you began all the way up the line,
so if it's the latest, you make changes to your work, and the changes you make for a reason, I assume, right?
So you're saying in isolation, like a specific instance.
So let's say Tolkien decided, the elves, they were not actually born here, but they awoke over on this place. Then he changed it. So the canon is now that they are awoken on the place here instead of there.
It's presumed that the revised version is the true canon.
Assuming then that if he did not change his mind again and changed it back, and wrote it down in the actual book, that is the book is the latest.
I would say it would have been better if he hadn't published stuff and then released it. But I'm also kind of glad some of the stuff was published because it gives us an interesting look at the world Tolkien built.
Yeah.
But I would say it's kind of like the Book of Enoch kind of stuff, where it's like there's some interesting things in it, but I wouldn't take it as like a biblical canon kind of thing. Like it's set aside from that, and there might be some interesting things about the world in it, but it wouldn't be considered canon.
Yeah, sure.
from that
But
perspective,
basically,
because it
in
just
my
wouldn't line
opinion,
up.
canon is just the latest version, and then if you officially release it, that's the version
I would
you
say
released
the
at that
official
point.
original, specifically,
Sure.
because otherwise somebody comes out now and just like, well, I have the rights to it and wrote some stupid.
No,
canon.
that it can only be the author.
Well, yes, they are an author. They have the rights to the
Yeah,
intellectual
but
property.
that's not enough. You must be the original author.
Wow, you're so hardcore.
Yes.
Oh,
So,
I would agree with you, but
so
also
for
we have,
example, I would consider the Silmarillion to be slightly lesser in canon than
what if Brandon
the original
Sanderson
trilogy.
pulled a revision of his stuff and pulled out a whole bunch of things and put a whole bunch of other stuff that completely contradicts everything that he had
You
prior?
mean for his own work?
Yes, like Stormlight Archives or
Yeah, yeah.
Mistborn or something.
If he completely re-releases a new version, with changed stuff in the story, then I would say that that is the new canon.
Even if it has tons of contradictions and the first original did not.
If it had, I mean, it's still what he chose to make it.
Because canon typically is
Contradictions do not necessarily make something not canon.
well, I'm saying things like in one section he blatantly says, I haven't read all of Stormlight Archives, so I don't know for sure. But if he had, I'm using Tolkien references, but if
Yeah, but
Brandon Sanderson came in and
I
said
know
orcs
the
are
example
blatant,
you're going to give, right?
irredeemable, nothing good about them, and then later on says they're good in the same canon,
In the same canon, then that's a problem. But
yes,
if you
contradiction.
release the whole thing
And
anew
in
with changed stuff, then that's new canon.
I know, but what I'm saying is like I have the original Mistborns up there, which
Yeah,
right there, and
but the new revised
if
version
they
is.
have something in the original and
Mhm.
it's smooth as butter, goes through perfectly fine.
Right.
And then they go to the new revised versions, and now they
Mhm.
have at the beginning of the first book or like midway through the first book, the orc characters are completely irredeemable. They're pure evil. There's
Sure.
nothing good about them. And then like halfway through the third book,
Mhm.
we can redeem them. We can fix them. Those contradictions in the same revised that completely contradict each other, and that's only one of countless possibilities of
Mhm.
what other things could be problematic.
It would still be the
Would that
latest
be
version.
could
And
it
that's
be
canon.
canon? Because it can't be canon if you have contradictions applied.
Of course, it can be.
Well, no. The dark one's the good guy, but the dark one's also the bad guy. Well, which one is it? They can't be both true. You have
Well,
to solve the problem.
okay, fair enough. It's a paradox,
That's what
but
I'm saying. Is it in order
it's
for
still
something
the
to be
original thing.
canon, the questions have to be answered if there is a contradiction.
Okay, no, I can see what you mean.
So if something were to happen and it completely contradicts, if Terry Brooks or Ellis was it Ellie Modoset or one of the other great fantasy
Right.
authors or horrible
So
fantasy authors,
my revised definition then, right,
contradiction
is the latest version of
without.
non-contradicting
That was
system.
my view. You freaking plagiarist.
But
Uh,
it has to be the latest version, not the
yeah.
not
I would say
for
the
example, if you
latest
have
non-contradictional version of
yeah,
it
so if
would
you have
be
a
the.
previous version and you change something, but it's still
Well,
consistent, that new
that's
one
the
is the
same
proper
reason for like the orc origin. We don't take the one over here that's the one off work, the one over here that's a couple off work, and then we have the main line. We
right.
stick to the
But
main
see,
line because that was the latest that we
but the
have.
main line also doesn't really have
It doesn't have to have all the details. I'm just saying that's the one that's in the line. That's in the books
right,
that are in that
yeah.
line.
But
So we would hold that to be
in the
canon.
main line, we don't know the origin.
I'm not. This isn't about whether the origin is accurate or not. The point is that would be because it's the latest. That would be the canon.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'm saying your same point. You're arguing against your own point. I don't know why you're arguing against it.
No, but see, I thought you were talking specifically about the Silmarillion and what it says about the origin of the orcs.
No. I'm saying I think the Unfinished Tales has a version. The Book of Lost Tales 1 and 2 has their own version. All those different little books that are not like they're branches, like ideas and concepts. He was going towards something,
Yeah.
but then changed and went to the normal. What we have now is the
Mhm.
modern canon.
Sure. Yeah.
That modern canon came later, and thus supporting your and my viewpoint that the later the version is the correct canon because it was the more complete and it
Yeah.
didn't have contradictions.
Mhm.
The other ones are not mainline canon, but they have canon aspects in
Sure.
them because they
Agreed.
overlap with the main canon. So in that sense, we have the main canon. So him saying there's not really such a thing as canon in Tolkien doesn't make sense. Now you could argue that all of it is not as a total whole canon because
Mhm.
obviously there are contradictions. But when you
Yeah.
solve the contradictions by following the main, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, you have a canon.
Well, the
is the canon.
Silmarillion is actually the first one, right?
Well,
Because
I'm saying in terms of published
chronologically.
points. I'm
Sure.
talking published points.
Fair enough.
Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and then Silmarillion was still kind
However,
of being amalgamated.
Silmarillion does get a bit dodgy because, of course, it's no longer Tolkien himself.
Yes, but
it's
is his spiritual
Christopher
successor and his accepted
organizing his notes,
finisher.
right? It's
Well, and
accepted
obviously
as reasonably close.
his basic knowledge of his conversations with his own
Mhm.
father
Yeah.
of what the direction was intended to go, and he just formalized the notes. Same thing as Brandon
Mhm.
Sanderson taking all of Robert Jordan's notes and putting them together and compiling the book.
That's a bit of a different situation, I think.
I mean, not terribly far, no.
Well, the question with regards to Brandon Sanderson is how much notes did he actually follow, right? Because
Well, apparently
we
the
know
notes
that he
are
had to-
available, so you can read them. I just don't remember where you have to go to get them. But apparently there's like an online internet archive vault or something that has all the notes or
I
something
don't
like
think
that.
there's an online one.
I could have sworn somebody said read.
Though maybe it
a
could
couple
be
years.
after the recent
This
what is it?
auction.
Auction, yeah.
There was an auction not too long ago, but
I'm not sure.
when I went through the stuff on that auction, I didn't see anything about notes. I'm
No, but
assuming they're going to keep those, but I don't know.
probably. But I think you have to go to some physical place, and
Whether you do or not, you can always go to the physical place, scan them, and you have it in them.
yeah, but
You
that's
could have digital if you wanted to.
super far away.
Point being is that there are some people who know that, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's raised a contention.
No,
with
but
what they have.
Brandon Sanderson himself said he had to make up a lot of
He had to fill in some gaps in between, yes. But as long as he's holding to the plot points, that's fine. But also some of the stuff in the
Silmarillion. He had to
Silmarillion,
make additional characters that may have changed minor things while keeping the major plot lines the same. So,
well, he had to make concessions, which is
slightly
perfectly
more
fine.
dodgy than the Silmarillion.
Well, I'm sure that there's certain stuff that Christopher Tolkien himself added in,
Sure.
but he added it in with the spirit of his father's vision.
Mhm.
Which I would say Brandon Sanderson attempted to do the same thing for Robert Jordan.
But probably
I would
not be
say
as good as this.
Christopher did a better job because he was always in tune. I mean, he grew up with his dad, obviously. He had all that knowledge. He was the most sucked into that world. And he's always communicating with his dad, and his dad saying, "You can finish my work for me since I can't finish it." And he's like, "Sure."
That's
I
fair.
would assume there's going to be more continuity, similarities, and less errors than there would be Robert Jordan. Doesn't mean that Brandon Sanderson did a bad job. There's certain aspects.
No, I'm not saying he did a bad job.
Well, I know. I'm covering the differences.
The best anyone could do.
Probably.
But of course,
he's currently, I think, arguably the best fantasy writer alive.
Yeah, but how many are still alive? To be honest, that are good.
Well, I mean, how many were good to begin with? Not very many, in my opinion. But I mean, there's different people with different viewpoints. Whatever, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about.
but yeah, so I would say Silmarillion and Christopher Tolkien's work is definitely a step above the
Wheel of Time stuff.
Goodness of canon of the Brandon Sanderson Wheel of Time stuff.
Yeah.
But it's still slightly below actual proper Tolkien canon.
Well, that depends on how much of the Tolkien canon was actually put in as Tolkien stuff and how much of it Christopher added.
Yeah, but
if it's compilation of notes,
we know he
then I don't
added some stuff because he had to make it into a full story.
But if Tolkien trusts his own son to do so,
sure.
that I would say that it's completely fine.
But it's not going to be 100% perfect.
Well, if you can find the problems, then that's how you point them out.
Sure, but
can you find the points?
We don't know because
how do you not know? The only way to have a contradiction.
Are you a mind reader?
That's not necessary. A contradiction.
It is necessary.
If I read in the Fellowship of the Ring something that contradicts in the Silmarillion,
it's not the contradiction that's a problem. It's the problem that we don't know whether or not what Christopher wrote down is exactly the way Tolkien intended. It's probably not.
Well, but also keep in mind, it doesn't have to be the exact same as it was intended, as much as it follows the spirit of what it is.
No, because if it follows the spirit but does slightly
Tolkien corrected
different
himself
things,
in his own writings, so you can't say his writings by definition are the correct ones.
sure, he corrects himself, but he's
So
still
if there
the
was a note that Christopher has to correct because he sees something that his father's vision didn't want to follow, he might
right,
have to
but we
correct something.
know then that the correct version is the one Tolkien explained. Oh, this is actually supposed to be that.
But it's not the most recent one.
It is the most
Therefore,
recent revision.
no, the most recent revision was that Christopher Tolkien did.
No, because that's not done by Tolkien himself.
When you have someone finish your work, it's a lot different than somebody rewriting your work.
Yeah, of course.
So it's safe to say, considering Tolkien's own words about Christopher, that that is what he wanted to go with.
Sure, but Christopher doesn't know everything his father thought.
I would agree. No one knows everything
Yes.
about everybody
And
else's
so he
thoughts.
cannot possibly
But it is still canon.
perfectly. Yeah, it is still canon, but it's of a
Yeah.
slightly lesser grade.
Are you saying that the Silmarillion doesn't hold as high a canon as the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I mean, I could say that, yeah, but I would also say that it wouldn't.
It's still very close.
I wouldn't say that
probably-
there's a level of canon difference as much as a disparity in time of when the works were done.
Okay, fair.
Because
Fair.
in that disparity, if there's no contradictions, there's nothing to say it's not on equal tier. Because again, if you don't know and I don't know the individuals of what was going on in that sense, we can't know that it wasn't what he was intended to
Right.
do. So
But
there's no point in
we could
arguing that.
be almost certain, right? That's why I say almost all the
I'd
time.
say we are certain until we get new information. That's a safe point to be. If we
certain
say
until new, I would say uncertain.
if there's a
until new.
note coming out where Tolkien's like, I told Christopher a million times not to do this, and I know he's going to do it when I pass away. So if you
Mhm.
find this letter, it's not canon. If we find
Right.
that, I'll be like, yeah, he probably didn't follow his dad's
No,
vision.
I get that.
That would break it. But up until that
But
point, I
we
have to give him the
know
benefit of
he
the
had
doubt.
to make choices between different versions, and he may have chosen specific.
But there's also a lot of
versions.
information we don't know based off of verbal conversations between him and
Yeah,
his dad
sure.
about
Sure.
potential ideas. We can't know that stuff, but there's
But
no point in
I
worrying
think
about what we can't know.
I can't quite remember if this is 100% true, but I'm pretty sure he mentioned somewhere in, I don't know, an interview or whatever. I'm not sure if he does those. That he had to make choices.
You don't know if he does interviews?
Well, not anymore, at least. But I'm pretty sure he said at
Honestly,
some
he's
point.
dead.
Yeah, no, exactly. But as I said, I'm pretty sure he mentioned at some point that he had to make choices that he's not sure whether Tolkien would himself also have made. But it is getting really late.
Okay. Well, I
So
wanted to just read this one paragraph if you're cool with that.
one paragraph, sure.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
it the one with the yellow bit?
yeah, it's the yellow bit. But they don't know that yet because I haven't pulled it up for them yet.
Ah,
'Cause
okay, fair
I
enough.
have too many things to click on and I'm trying to find
Mhm.
it. All right. So we're gonna zoomy doomy in.
So
Woo!
this is about Simon.
Simon Tolkien, the bane of our existence.
Mhm.
In the Tolkien
And
world.
well,
If anybody is not familiar with Simon Tolkien is Tolkien's grandson. And he's kind of a jerk.
mhm.
And he's kind of a loser and all of the above. And I say that with all the love in my heart because I don't have any ill will towards the guy except for the fact that he's literally just destroying his entire family legacy. And everyone his age and on, like everyone younger than Christopher, Priscilla, and all them, they don't care about Tolkien's legacy. They just want the money from it.
Yeah, obviously.
They're trust fund babies. They don't have to work a day in their life. Now,
Yeah.
I have information on top of this, so I'll give it as we go. But this is an interview when Simon Tolkien was talking about a book he was writing, and I believe it was No Man's Land was the name of the book about World War One, a person in World War One, the story of the Battle of the Somme. But Simon Tolkien is responsible for Rings of Power. Characters that exist in it and stuff, he specifically wants them to be in it. That's Amazon built stuff around. Adar was one of those characters. So in here, he's asked about stuff, and it's a long thing. Most of it's absolutely not relevant to anything. But in this point, he says, being Tolkien's grandson blocked my writing. I found it very inhibiting that I was the grandson of such a genius. I thought it would be impossible for me to do anything creative because I couldn't possibly match up to him.
To be honest, I could, I can understand that sentiment. It's if your grandfather is a genius, right? Obviously, it's going to be hard.
There's a bit more of information, and I heard this in an interview. I couldn't find the interview with the exact words in it, sadly, but this is what I have actually heard myself.
If you ever find it, maybe
ear witness account. Yeah, if I could ever find it. Ear witness account. I heard it. It wasn't visual. This podcast. He talked about how he tried to get books published under a pseudonym because he didn't want to go under Tolkien, and he would like submit his book under this other name, and it would get rejected over and over and over and over again. It would constantly get rejected. But then as soon as he put Simon Tolkien on it, they would instantly be like, let's publish it, let's publish it, let's publish it, let's publish it. And that's how he found out and how he came to the conclusion that I'm not good enough. They don't want me. They want my last name. They want the legacy of my family, my grandfather's legacy. That's what sells.
Well, does it sell though?
Tolkien's work, yes, does sell. Like,
yeah, no, but I mean Simon's work.
No, I don't know. I would assume not as much
because
as his father's.
So if he couldn't publish under a pseudonym, that likely means that the publishers
didn't think it was that good. Yeah,
it wasn't that good, so likely doesn't sell.
Yeah, well, that's where it comes back to
the content is essentially the same.
Yes,
but
it's not essentially. It's the same. It's the exact same. So it didn't sell. What sells that book from the publisher's point of view is Tolkien's name.
Right.
So
but does it actually sell is the question.
That's irrelevant. That's not the point of this concept.
Okay, not for Tolkien.
Where I'm trying to get to is right here. So he's like, I'm feeling bogged down by the weight of my grandfather's legacy, and I feel like I can't do anything that would match it, which is true. I don't think anybody is ever going to be able to match it. Robert Jordan couldn't reach that heights, but he got moderately close.
He got pretty close.
He did a pretty good job despite having a lot of holes in his work. But despite that, it's still it's a massive work. So
how many of those holes were because he didn't live long enough to finish?
I'm not referring to those types. I'm referring to the ones the early books and stuff, like where he was intending to take it one direction and then it goes a different direction. We just never talk about it again. Those kind of things. Which it's forgivable. I mean, I'd say most, if not all, fans of Robert Jordan would forgive him for just leaving him there. It's still things I think about, but I like to theorize.
It would be nice to have a revised version.
Right? I don't know about now. I wouldn't want when they'd put something in it. I wouldn't.
I don't know, but like theoretically, had he lived to finish the series, maybe
I would have rather had an interview with him so he could yell at me and call me stupid because I think too much and I need to go touch grass.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true.
Because that's definitely what would happen. And he would hate my guts so much because I'm so pedantic about stuff. But in the work for Simon was like, I want to write my own stuff. I want my own recognition. It's me. It's all about me. Which, I mean, to be fair, somebody would rather be known for their own works than somebody else's.
Yeah,
it's reasonable. But it's taking a step.
It's taking a step. Writing.
I know, right? Of all the things you could have chosen to do, that's the thing you decided to do. But he wanted to be successful for his writing without the Tolkien name, which is why he chose a pseudonym. And then that didn't work out because it wasn't good. And then he puts his name on it, and then everybody wants to publish it. Everyone and their grandmother wants to publish it. Because people see the name Tolkien and think, I'll buy this book. Doesn't matter if it's Simon Tolkien.
No, it does.
No. Not for the general audience.
Maybe they just didn't read far enough. They just
they didn't see the S. They saw the T. That's
yeah,
it.
Fair enough.
And depending on how it could be just a Tolkien
So it
novel.
is SRR Tolkien instead of
Yeah.
JRR.
Well, I don't think there's any RRs. I don't know what his middle names are, but it's relevant.
Yeah,
The
I don't know
the
either.
guy
but-
himself is irrelevant because of what he did to his own grandparents or grandfather's legacy and his father's
Mhm.
legacy. So in that, there's a big issue of pride because he wants to be known for things. So in order for him to obtain these
But don't
heights,
you know, pride's a good thing these days.
it's definitely not. There's different types of pride, and all the prides they're pulling out of their wazoos is definitely not good ones. Now, in this particular sense, he has to tear down the legacy of his grandfather to make room for his legacy. The problem is, him and everybody else knows that's not going to happen. He might tear down the legacy of his grandfather, but it'll never boost him. He just has this concept in his head saying, I am going to be better. I'm going to write books. People are going to read my books, and I will be better than my grandfather because I'm going to destroy his legacy. So there's nothing there except my stuff. And then my stuff won't get destroyed. Now, what would be ironic is if his kids came along and wrote their own books and destroyed his legacy to get theirs up, and it would repeat the cycle. But nobody in the Tolkien
Well, his
family,
legacy doesn't need destroying, though, right? Because it's
already
never even
destroyed.
existed.
Well, I mean, it's existed. It's just destroyed already. And people like the Tolkien Professor or all the other shills like Nerd of the Rings and all them, those guys, they come at it from, I support Simon Tolkien, blah, 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 blah. Like they go through all that. It's ridiculous. It should
They just want the
never.
money.
They want either the money, the prestige, the spotlight, whatever it might be to suit them. And it's sad. But that's how we got all this stuff. That's why we have the Tolkien Professor saying, there's no canon. That's why we have people in debates on Twitter going and saying, well, they did the best they could because adaptation. All of these things is because things are pushed by Simon Tolkien. But they're not pushed the way Christopher Tolkien would push them, which would be accurately. They're not the way that Tom Shippey would push them. I don't care what Simon Tolkien has to say. I care about what Tom Shippey has to say. And he's not even related to the professor. That's because Tom Shippey understood what Tolkien was about. And I would say Christopher Tolkien was even more aware than Tom Shippey. But if Shippey can nail it on the head, then obviously Christopher Tolkien can. So I have faith in Shippey and Christopher and John Ronald Rule. I don't have any faith in anybody else in the Tolkien family. I did like Priscilla, but now that she's gone, there's not going to be any input coming from her. So what are you to do? So in that regard, that's how we got to the canon concept, the adaptation concept, because people have a misunderstanding of what adaptation is, and people have a misunderstanding of what canon is.
Yep.
And hopefully this cleared up a little bit of it, at least. I don't know how much it did.
Adaptation does not equal alteration, let's say.
An alteration is an alteration, and adaptation is an adaptation. To adapt something
Exactly.
is to take it from its form in its original media and turning it into another form that fits another media. In other words, paper to visual. That's an adaptation. Changing all of the contents in it does not equal adaptation. You can't go adaptation every time somebody says this is bad work, because that's what they
At
do.
best, you would have a very loose inspiration.
I was inspired by Tolkien and I wrote John Wick.
Yes.
That's not an adaptation.
It's not an adaptation, indeed.
That's not even inspiration, because everyone's inspired by Tolkien's work and they make
Fair enough.
nothing inspired remotely. What it is plagiarism. A fanfic
Probably.
plagiarism, and it's bad. But the point being, and I'd like to do some happy type themes. I thought about doing
That
some
would
video
be nice,
games.
yeah.
I thought about doing some video game playthroughs of games, if you would like to join me, if you ever have any of them, where we can go cover games that we enjoy and have happy thoughts, or if we see a movie or
Sure.
something that we think is
Could be fun.
good quality or something. That's something I'd like to do, because I'm honestly getting tired of all the bad stuff being the main point. But it's what sells, man. People want to hear about the bad stuff, and I'm like, we could do some good stuff. I've got like 12,000, not 12,000, 1,200 games. I wish I had 12,000 games.
Yeah, I don't have that many.
I have 1,200 games between my GOG and my Steam and all my physical copies of all the different consoles I have, on top of all the stuff behind me and everything else that I'd love to cover. I think I'm planning on doing some like manga and anime type of stuff with like Crimson Law and Curse Squash and all those guys.
Sounds fun.
That'd be fun. I want to do video games. I don't always have time for books, but when I do, it's Wheel of Time. So there'd be positive stuff, but probably not very many in the books, at least not for a long time. Movies, a little bit easier to write reviews on than a book. Less time consuming. TV series, like I like the Shogun TV series, but I probably won't do a full review for it. I might just go on and say I like Shogun and then stop recording. Like, it's pretty obvious. But in that type of stuff, I'd like to do that here soon. So maybe you guys have something to look forward to in that regard. If I could ever figure out how to stream a video game and play it on my OBS to record without it just stuttering the entire time, that would be fantastic. But unfortunately, that's a lot of power.
That could be nice.
It would be nice, but it would probably require me to have a whole other computer to do one to do streaming and one for me to game on.
Possibly.
But that requires a Meta PC promotion. I don't see that happening in the next 20 years. So fun to that. Also, I'm getting broke at this point, so I can't just go out and buy a $3,000 PC that I need to do this. So there's that. I have too many things on my plate. Anyway, regardless, I did want to talk about this because the adaptation argument, the canon argument are things that I take very personally because they're false. The arguments are based on sand foundations and they can get washed away with the briefish argument against them, as opposed to the actuals.
They're also everywhere.
Well, they're everywhere. Yes. They can be everywhere, but they still can get washed away. When you have actual canon and you say, here's what
you need a lot of water to wash all of that away.
No, you just need canon.
Yeah, but you have to do it one step at a time.
Yeah. It's like, hey, if you think that this isn't canon, bring it to me. We'll slap it down. We'll talk about it. We'll go from there.
And then you're busy for like a million years.
Yeah. If that's what it takes to destroy their stupid construct of what canon is, when it's absolutely, definitely, totally not canon, that's what it takes. But the thing is people need to take that time and that stance if they care. I care about the professor. I care about his works. So I want to defend that from people who just make up whatever they feel like they want to have and then run with it. Yeah. If enough people are on the same page, then enough people could wipe out those false ideas and stuff. The same thing when he brought his own headcanon in about why Gandalf doesn't want to go to Barad-dûr and fight Sauron. That's headcanon. That's not canon. And he can think it's in his own head. That's a cool storyline that I would like to explore. You can, but it's already been explained way back here in the friggin' Silmarillion. Like, in the timeline, this isn't even a possibility. But he didn't even apparently compute that when he said that when words came out of his mouth. So, needless to say, it is what it is. So, but we can go ahead and call it there. I know you got to go. I need to go do stuff too. But thank you, good sir, for hanging out. I know we have our disagreements because you're wrong, but it's okay.
Well, I think I'm right.
Of course you do.
Indeed.
That doesn't mean you're right.
Right.
Anyway.
But also it doesn't mean that you're not wrong.
I have more evidence leaning in my favor, good sir.
I press X to doubt.
You don't have an X to press. Ha! Therefore, you're wrong.
Damn.
Hey. You look at your keyboard. Where'd my X key go?
No, I can see it right here.
It's an illusion. Anyway, thanks everybody for hanging out. Hopefully we'll have some more goodies coming out for you. Hopefully if you guys are watching, leave a comment wishing Matt swift recovery. We miss him already, and he's been gone only for a short time. So maybe he'll comment on one of the comments himself, and that'd be really cool. But if you guys would like to share the video with people, if you think they would enjoy the content, or if you appreciate the content and you want to force it upon people, by all means. If you'd like, comment, subscribe. If you appreciate what we're doing, that would be extremely helpful. You guys are awesome, and you are greatly, greatly appreciated. And hopefully at some point we can pop out stuff more than just once a week. I know occasionally I can get a second, maybe even a third if they're short videos out. I've just been so busy lately in real life stuff. I haven't had time to just sit down and do what I wanted to do. So hopefully you guys can look forward to some cool stuff. But until then, we'll be just trucking along. So Sage doesn't have anything going on, so we can just skip that.
Exactly.
He'll be here next week. That's about it.
Probably.
Unless
I don't know, some weird stuff happens.
There's no weird. If you die,
You never know.
If you die, we're gonna resurrect you, and you're gonna be here.
Okay. Is that something you can do?
You never doubt my abilities. I know a guy.
Okay.
But yeah,
We'll see.
Or will he? But yes. So thanks everybody for hanging out, and remember, my friends, walk in the light.
Farewell.